companies that we have been working with. We've been collaborating with many different teams in public affairs to see how we can use AI in our work with concrete examples, with practical use cases that you can then go back to your team and experiment with. So our goal as people working at Influence Builders is to basically train people and help them basically understand the skills that will be needed as we go into AI. So to help people really master the skills of tomorrow. And we've been running these workshops all across Europe, in the US as well. And we've been training many different teams in big pharma companies on the specific ways they can use AI and to sort of expand their mindset when it comes to using artificial intelligence at work.
So with that, brief housekeeping is that this is the first in a series of 3 webinars we're running this week, and this is dedicated to pharma and life sciences. Now, obviously, if you are from a different sector, different industry, maybe food or beverage or any other consumer goods or chemicals, you are absolutely welcome here, and you're at the right place. Because the examples that we're giving are tailored for pharma and life sciences, but they are hopefully giving rise to other ideas and spark more use cases in your particular field of interest. And then we have trade associations in 2 days and another one for international organizations and EU agencies the day after. All of this is being recorded. Now, we're going to do a moment of housekeeping in a second, but just to say what we're going to cover today. So we look at main AI challenges, where certainly anyone who's been using AI intensively will have experienced some of those, and we want to address some of the use cases, not just use cases, but again, some challenges, but then looking at more practical, immediately applicable use cases and methods, which we hope will benefit you. Also looking at some advanced prompting and use and ideas that we trust will be immediately applicable to your daily job. And the Q&A is very welcome throughout. If you have any comments or something you want to share with the participants, you are more than welcome to do so in the chat box. And then in terms of disclaimer, so some AI answers, obviously, that we put here may contain inaccuracies. And that is something we're going to address of what you can do about it. But often what happens is we demonstrate here use cases and examples based on publicly available information. If it comes to your particular company, organization, corporation, or association, those would probably be much more accurate because you can overlay it with your own proprietary data and your understanding of your sector. So that is something that in a real life scenario, the inaccuracies tend to be actually less and not more. And then the tools we show are just for illustration, certainly. And they're meant to spark ideas. Ask any question in the chat, like I said before. And then all slides will be shared afterwards, along with the recording. So you are welcome to share it with others who you think would benefit. And the speed will be somewhat fast because we want to cover everything in 45 minutes. And that's an ambitious plan for the many things we have in the bag for you. So if anything sounds a little too fast, you can always come back to it, look at the slides afterwards, or follow up with us through questions or emails. So Jacques.
So a question for you to start the conversation here is to ask you, what do you use AI for? So with the many pharma companies that we've been working with, for some it's drafting policy documents, for others it's preparing meetings. And we see that there's many different use cases that teams are facing at the moment when it comes to AI. So feel free to type in the chat what you use AI for on a daily basis.
And while you do that, we do have certain ideas what might come back and what sort of use cases are out there. And there's a broader point we're going to try to make with that. So please put in the chat box what's your most straightforward use case or most helpful use case when it comes to AI.
I think this is part of the conversation, is to understand what others are doing so we can see and expand the way we view AI at work. So sometimes we think it's just about drafting documents or summarizing documents, but there's so much more we could be doing with AI. And as you're going to be adding these use cases in the chat, it's really important to think about AI first as a way to have a conversation starter. So we like to usually start our workshops with a fun example. And so you might want to use AI to create a scenario, because the scenario then helps you to add more details or add a story to your prompts so that AI can come with much better answers. So let's imagine this would be a prompt that you might be using for ChatGPT or many other tools. It's a quiet Thursday night in a Brussels bar. A health official and a patient advocate are talking about Pfizer. What surprising strength do they both agree Pfizer has? Something the public affairs team would never hear in a meeting, but should. And this is really the power of AI, is that you can create a scenario. Let's say someone is talking at a bar, or someone is at the airport in line for the next flight. What do they think, or what does this audience think about us? What does this audience think about what we're doing in public affairs? And as a response, you can see that the AI did some research online to understand what exactly these people could be talking about, and it came up with this. So Pfizer's surprising strength is top-ranked patient engagement and reputation among patient groups. So this is something that then you can take to your team and then process the information, understand if there's anything else that needs to be addressed from your audience perspective. And then it goes on with praising Pfizer's authentic patient-centric partnerships. So again, AI is really a conversation starter. It can really launch a conversation in your team to brainstorm ideas, to come up with better ways or better strategies in terms of public affairs, and to basically help you do all the more time-consuming work of doing research, summarizing documents, analyzing policy developments in your specific area. Something we also wanted to mention is that whenever you look for information on how to improve your AI skills, it usually comes down to learning how to prompt, so asking better questions. And we think that AI can help you do a little bit more, which is learning or helping you learn how to think. So this is the difference between having an AI mindset and not having an AI mindset, is the fact that you can expand the way you think about AI, the way you think about your work, and the way your team collaborates using AI.
So to do that, we really believe that to solve more complex problems, AI is extremely helpful. But to do that, the key to that is asking better questions, asking deeper questions. And one observation which we have had over, let's say, the past 2 years, we've been running these kind of workshops and presentations, is that most people tend to use AI in a straightforward manner, as to use it to execute on a request or a task that they already have, and not necessarily helping or leveraging AI's ability to challenge their own thinking, to challenge their own assumptions, and ask questions about their own questions. And that sounds a bit theoretical, but we're going to give you many practical examples what that looks like. So Jacques, present your favorite example.
So when I started using AI, I said, basically, I asked ChatGPT, what am I doing with my life? And it sounds like a deep question. It sounds like a question that can be very insightful based on the results I'm getting, but it's a very broad and very generic question. So the answers you will get to this kind of question are very broad and very generic. But if you ask yourself a much deeper and more specific question, you'll get much better answers from these AI systems. So based on everything you know about me, imagine what my next 5 years could look like with a list of impressive accomplishments. And then you're asking the AI to suggest a program or a set of daily, weekly, and monthly tasks to complete or to get closer to this promising future. So similarly to what you have to do in your work, you have to ask yourself much deeper questions, because that's how you get much better answers. So you could be asking this simple question: summarize the European Commission's pharma package. It's going to come up with a lot of very broad or very generic answers. But if you're being a lot more specific here, and you're providing a PDF, so you're providing the specific legislation, and you're asking the AI to read the PDF carefully, then generate a practical, thorough summary from a market access perspective and bullet points. So you're providing more details in terms of the format that you want the answer to be presented. Then you're focusing on FPA, which is a large association in Europe in the pharma space. So research FPA members' portfolio and top issues, and then cross-check these issues with the summary, and then highlight the 5 best strategic angles for advocacy. So obviously, this is a very specific and very detailed prompt. You don't have to go through all these different details depending on what you have to do. But this is just to give you a sense of how specific and how detailed your prompt can be when you're specifying the document you want the AI to focus on, the format of the answer you want, and also basically the goal that you're trying to achieve with this specific prompt.
And maybe 2 things to point out. One is when Jacques says carefully, that's a strange instruction to a machine. You don't tell your Excel sheet to calculate this formula carefully. But with AI, that it's the way it operates, it typically prioritizes speed over accuracy. But by saying carefully, it will take a bit more time, and we're talking nanoseconds or maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but it's going to give you a more detailed analysis than trying to answer quickly. And the other thing is it does rely on certain assumptions. So when it says, okay, cross-check policy priorities, well, the policy priorities are inferred from whatever it had found based on the previous role, the previous instruction with the FPA members' portfolios. So sometimes we are okay to rely on the AI tools analysis, but sometimes we want to be more explicit and more specific as to what it needs to focus on. So moving on with 3 levels of data privacy, we would distinguish between these 3. So Jacques, you want to present that?
Sure. So the first one is the kind of data that you'll have access to is the public data. So if it's information you find online or information that your company knows, but you can easily reuse because it's publicly available information, then it's fine. You can use it really freely, and there's no issue with that. The second type of data is data that's a little bit more sensitive. It's internal data. So the idea here is when you're using this internal data is to use approved tools and to make sure that you're not revealing more information than you should. And then the third part is, or the third type of data is confidential data. So this is more data that is very sensitive to your company, and it's data that shouldn't be spread online, obviously. So with the confidential data, you should really be careful as to how you're using it. You should never input this data into AI tools unless you fully anonymize the data that you're using and making sure that these tools are not trained based on the specific data. So whenever you're using different types of data in your AI prompts, you have to be cautious as to, is this public information that I can use? Is it internal information that I should really be careful about? Or is it confidential data that I should never actually use in these prompts?
And to make it very practical, most organizations we have worked with, especially in the pharma space or chemical area, but many trade associations are increasingly would have their own internal trusted tool. And that might as well be a co-pilot, might as well be based on some other tool. But the point is that there's a central hub that you trust, where the IT and the legal departments and the settings are accordingly configured, and everything else can be actually pulled into that. So you can find public research, you can get other types of information into it, along with confidential or sensitive data, and that is eventually your processing hub. So with those baseline ideas and best practices or approaches, we could certainly say much more, but we want to look at very practical use cases that you can apply immediately in your work. And not only as such, the way we present it, but also it sparks ideas for more use cases, we hope. And the way we look at the different use cases of AI, there's this approach, this thought experiment of Maslow pyramid, which is the fun and entertainment. Yeah, that's great and good, but in the business world, that's not going to be the immediate use case. The simple task execution is what most people tend to use for proofreading, summaries, drafting basic emails. But the more interesting bits are the workflow optimization, where you take stakeholder inputs and say, what are the common points that all of them share, and what are the differences that they disagree on? data analysis of pulling multiple sources of data and overlaying them and then optimizing it for the output. And then the advanced problem solving is where we would nudge you towards, is to challenge your advocacy strategy, challenge your creative problem solving of how I engage with this policymaker, congressman, member of European Parliament, and what are some better ways to persuade them. And then there are many custom applications out there which do a dedicated task that helps your work. And one of them that I want to showcase is, this is a tool I have just launched and developed. It's called Rhetora.ai. You're welcome to sign up and test it. Basically, we're using their personas and groups, which we call cohorts, be that Gen Z or free market conservatives or environmental activists. And you can upload any message and you can apply communication frameworks to test the message and get personalized feedback from these personas or groups. And then they give you an information of your press release or your policy statement or your campaign slogan. How would that look from their vantage point? And also specific suggestions as to what you can change and how to improve it so it will resonate better with them, and applying those different communication frameworks. So that, again, this is a very, for public policy, for policy communications, strategic communications, this is a great tool. And then you can even chat with those personas. So having looked at that, a couple of points on what use cases we recommend using AI for, which are not necessarily the most obvious ones. Hence, we are hoping it's going to spark new ideas.
So the first one is to research trends. This is the number one use case that we have and we see with a lot of pharma companies. So to answer this question, for example, do you think this is a good prompt? So find the key global health and access trends more relevant to our strategy. Something that we want to say is that we need to provide better context or more context to the prompts that we submit to the AI systems. So this is obviously not a good enough prompt because we need to provide more context. And here's an example. You're a detailed-oriented healthcare policy researcher at the French pharma company Sanofi. So this is a great first line for what you're trying to do here. You're trying to provide more context as to who we are, what we're trying to solve, and what is the format we want the answer to be written in, right? And so you can simply break down your prompt into multiple steps and explain what is your company focusing on, what are you trying to do? So here it's identifying 5 emerging policy trends in the EU, which will affect the pharma industry in the next 3 to 5 years. You're being very specific with what you want. And then for each trend, describe exactly the policy trend, the policy change, and explain why it matters for the specific company. You can also focus on the likelihood and the impact of a trend, just to get a sense of how big of an impact this trend will have on your space. And then you can provide some additional context on the formatting of the answer that you want from AI. And so these are the different trends that you might get from this prompt, as well as the policy change, why it matters, and the likelihood and impact. And again, we ask for a specific table, but if you want to change the format of your answer and say, for example, I want to see these findings in a clear diagram showing likelihood and impact, then you would get something like this, right? And this is a different way for you to research trends because you're not asking for text, you're not asking for a table, you're asking for a diagram to help you visualize these trends more clearly.
And maybe just to add one point, so this kind of issue map is something that public affairs professionals would often work on. Now, again, we rely on the AI tool's judgment, but we can be more deliberate because I can say, well, let's first research the business impact. Let's put numbers on that. Let's talk to different departments in our company, with those who deal with pricing or those who deal with resources or any other, and let's correlate that with some Excel sheets with deeply researched data. And then the AI is going to map it out and do that data crunching, but you are more deliberate as to what you feed in. So a general question is, how much do I rely on the tool's own assessment, and how much do I deliberately create for it? And then I can take a step-by-step approach to eventually get far superior results. Now, another area would be anticipating policy impact. And this is something that public affairs professionals or corporate affairs often does. But to say, well, we can actually do scenario planning, and we can imagine the worst case scenario. That sounds a little negative, but again, we're doing sort of a post-mortem or pre-mortem, in the sense that we want to imagine when things go wrong, and we want to map out how to avoid that negative scenario. So we could even give a very structured prompt along the lines that you see on screen. So we could say, well, your role as a pharma policy analyst, you can be more specific as to which company, which jurisdiction, which specific area inside the company. And you say, well, scan global policy shifts affecting brain health access and patient engagement. So again, if this was a very consequential task, I would probably do that research separately and then feed in the results directly. But for the sake of demonstrating this, I'd say, well, fast forward 1 year, brain health uptake fails in Asian markets. So that's the negative scenario we are looking to avoid. And then say, identify what caused it, which signals were missed, how global forces hit local markets, and then see, what am I looking for? I'm looking for 3 pitfalls and preemptive actions per pitfall. So I want to understand what can go wrong, and what exactly am I going to do, or does the AI suggest I do, or at least consider, to avoid that scenario? And the fun bit, and this term or this turn of phrase I learned from Jacques, the brutally direct. So it's funny with AI that you can use those adjectives, which are a bit counterintuitive, not something that you necessarily come up with individually, but to say, well, I want you to not just be honest, but brutally direct and expose blind spots. So this is the response we would get about the scenarios, the outline of the scenarios, and what is the scene, or what does it look like, and then pitfall 1, pitfall 2, pitfall 3. So these are things that the AI had identified. Now, again, I'm saying the caveat that I had mentioned at the beginning. This is all based on public information that Perplexity picked up, or we could have used Google AI search, or other tools. As a side note, ChatGPT's search is not that great these days, or at least not yet, but it's definitely going to significantly improve. And there are other tools out there. Claude AI is picking up very fast. But again, for the sake of demonstrating the use cases, often we use Perplexity when it comes to the search capabilities. And this is what it found. Now, if you are working for a pharma, life science, chemical, or other company, you would likely have a lot of internal data. And to the degree you have a trusted internal tool, you can have best of both worlds. Do an external search, feed the results into your internal trusted system, overlay it with your own internal sensitive documents, and your internal tool will process both and bring you superior results.
So to answer the question, what can we do when AI answers seem wrong or missing details? Because that's something that we get sometimes from these AI systems. Something just doesn't seem right when we're asking a question, when we're getting these answers. So on the next slide, we'll show you how to do it. And you have to challenge your AI tool. You have to ask questions back to make sure that you understand why the AI that you're using came up with these results. So explain to me in detail how you came up with these results and share your main blind spots. It's a great question to ask as a follow-up when you're getting an answer from the AI that doesn't seem correct. And it's basically going to explain to you how and why it came up with these results, right? So it's going to break down the process, and it's going to explain maybe some of the pitfalls or some of the blind spots it has when it comes to the answers it came up with. So it's always great to focus on having a conversation with these AI tools and to ask follow-up questions to make sure that you're covering everything and you're understanding how AI came up with these results.
Now, a little bit moving on to another area, but before I do that, I see the chat that Balázs was asking about giving a role to the AI, how helpful or important that is. And I see Jacques gave his perspective. So I think it largely depends on how relevant that is to the particular task you're trying to solve. Otherwise, it will resort to the most likely situation or the most likely role that assumes you have, or it knows that you have, if you have the memory function turned on. But for instance, I can be many things in many roles in my life. So I can be a dad, and I can be a business expert, I could be an entrepreneur, or I could be a client to my accountant. So the very same person can have very different roles and a very different focus in the request or the task that I'm asking the AI to process. So that's why it's helpful that maybe you're looking at from a pricing strategy perspective, you are looking at it from a corporate communications perspective, or you're looking at it from a PR perspective. So it's helpful to specify it, because the AI will basically zoom in or filter the answer, or the answer it's going to give you through that lens to the degree you specify it. So going back, stakeholder mapping, as for the sake of example, we took GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. So act as GSK public affairs executive and build me a US stakeholder map for drug pricing negotiations, and focusing on the three most influential stakeholders. Now, this is a somewhat limiting way of looking at it, because I could first do a broad, casting a wide net, and say, look for 30 stakeholders and then rank them according to their influence. So here I took a shortcut and says, okay, just give me the three most influential ones. Chances are, if you are in that line of business, it should be pretty straightforward who those are, but we're doing a search. And then for each one, summarize who they are, why they matter. And then identify two additional non-obvious ones. And the term non-obvious is non-obvious, I would assume, if that's not too self-referential, because non-obvious usually picks up stakeholders that you may not have thought about, that are out there, like maybe a startup, maybe a health technology, or some association or group that we hadn't thought about. So just to say, these were the pretty straightforward ones that those in that line of business would likely be aware of, nicely referenced with press and other sources. And then the non-obvious ones were recommended here. Now, again, if I were to really take it very seriously and I'm looking for that, I would push multiple rounds, not just be limited to two, and then give more specific instructions. And for instance, if you're in a local market in Portugal or in Singapore, I would instruct the AI to pick up sources in the local language as well. So saying it in English may limit in some cases what it finds, but saying use Portuguese or Chinese or any other language around the world, wherever you are, that is usually helpful.
Another use case is to prepare high-level meetings. So you can use AI to do a lot of research, to analyze the different components of your meeting, to prepare your strategy. So an example here with preparing high-level meetings would be, for example, to review the CEO of the public profile of Pfizer's CEO, for example, and the focus on specific topics. And here we ask to infer his priorities, value, and communication style. So we're relying on AI to make assumptions on this person's priorities, values, and communication style, and then to come up with 3 persuasive arguments to convince him to ramp up investment in Poland, right? And we also added here, apply Harvard negotiation best practices to make these arguments even stronger. So this is really a best practice, is to always think about a framework or something that you've read, or a best practice in terms of a specific space, and to specify that the AI would use this best practice to come up with better writing or better arguments. So then it came up with the CEO's profile, and then it gave us some ideas on how to convince this person, right? And to thinking about the person's communication style or priorities, to then inform the arguments that the AI will come up with. So the argument 1 with the counter argument as well, with the Harvard negotiation technique, and the other arguments as well. So argument 1, 2, 3, we could have asked for more arguments. We could have asked for maybe to expand on the length of each argument. You can also think about conversation starters for these meetings. You can think about challenging questions that this person might be asking during the meeting. So this is all the prep work you can do in advance that is more related to researching and analyzing data found online on the specific person to help your team be prepared for the specific meeting. So
And
as long as you're using best practices, frameworks, and you're asking for things that are online that you can also analyze yourself, these are great ways for you to prepare for high-level meetings.
And of course, you can also do this with ministers, with senior civil servants. You might as well feed someone's LinkedIn profile into the AI and try to adapt arguments. I mean, positive arguments for that particular personal profile. So there's a lot you can do with these frameworks and personalized arguments to be more persuasive. And you can also consider alternative perspectives by saying, and for the sake of example, we took AstraZeneca and say, well, pressure test their recent sustainability initiatives from 3 different perspectives. So you can feed in, maybe that's a report, maybe that's a press release or some summary, and say, well, look at it from a skeptical investor side, look at it from an NGO critic, and you can look at it from a realistic journalist. And AI is really good at taking different perspectives and then giving you certain angles. And we're not looking for perfection, and we're not looking for fully 100% impersonation, but to the degree the AI gives you a new angle, a new argument, a new idea, it's already helpful, because then you can corroborate your underlying text and anticipate those pushbacks or those perspectives. And this is what it gave. Coming up with the different initiative. Again, I could be more hand-holding and say, these are the ones I want you to look at, and not necessarily just pick up whatever you find as most likely online. And then giving the investor, the NGO, the journalist, but you can be much more nuanced and say, well, that particular investor is very keen on increasing the R&D spending of the company, or another investor is more conservative and they don't want so much risk. So you can be much more nuanced as to what other perspectives are and what they think about the business. And again, these are the ideas that it gave. So as we're slowly coming to the end, because we want it to be efficient, effective, useful, I trust that these perspectives have given you some ideas, and also to suggest that on our website, on the Influence Builders website, we have a curated list of tools that we often use, that we've played with, we have tried. They do different things, whether it's agents, whether it's video generation, whether it's meeting transcripts, whether it's slide deck creation. These tools are pretty good. And you might want to check out the full list if you are looking for a curated set of tools. And also to leave you with a couple of takeaways, where as a very brief summary of some of the things we've covered. We encourage you to look at giving more context when you're using AI. Often there's a lot of talk about prompting and the prompt engineering and how high quality a prompt needs to be. Yes, yet often the context is even more important, because the AI may not necessarily know everything that you are expecting it to be aware of. Number 2, avoid using personal data. So that's a topic on its own, so to say, but always err on the side of caution. Use trusted tools which have the necessary legal, technological safeguards of not leaking information into the void. And there are many ways to anonymize or to remove anything personally identifiable while using AI. Asking deeper questions, even you can ask AI to say, here's what I want to achieve. Ask me 3 questions before you get started. And when you instruct AI to ask you back questions, then it's going to fine tune your request, and the eventual output will be significantly better. And then using AI as a thinking partner to say, where are my blind spots? What am I missing? What are hidden assumptions in my plan that I may not be aware of? So you're basically stress testing your ideas with the help of AI to make you realize what you may be missing or the direction that you're taking. And then stating your problem and goals. So to say, I want to get, I want to have a persuasive 1-minute stakeholder input at a public consultation. And the goal is to emphasize our company's innovation credentials. Okay, that's the goal. Instead of prompting the AI to do something, to say, well, this is what I want to achieve. What is the best way of getting there? So again, I'm using AI as a thinking partner and not just simply as an intern that will execute whatever I say. And the last bit is to encourage you to experiment. A lot of these are really based on trial and error, back and forth, what works best for you, and how can you harness the power of AI. And if you want to go further, we are very happy to help you in that journey. We run multiple workshops, I would say almost every week, but definitely every month. We tend to travel around and speak online and offline on how to use AI and what are the best practices, explore more use cases specifically for your company or organization or association, and to improve accuracy and privacy where the results are actually helpful to you and not just fluff, but they're high quality, high added value to it. Jacques, anything else to add?
No, I think it's really it's a conversation we'd like to continue having. So feel free to go on the website. We have a lot of resources there. We always try to update with the latest use cases that are specific to your space. We're also very active on LinkedIn. So if you have any questions, if you have any follow-up questions to this session, then feel free to ask any questions. And we also wanted to open a short Q&A with the few minutes we have still here, so that you can ask any questions if you have any burning question after what we talked about. But hopefully this session, you got a better understanding of the different things you could be using AI for in terms of use cases, not just focusing on simply prompting, but thinking about how you can think better before asking any questions to AI. So hopefully this session was really helpful. We're still going to be here for a couple minutes if you have any additional questions. And I also shared in the chat a link to our list of tools. So there you'll have access to what we think are really the best tools in our space that are really helpful in terms of writing, in terms of researching. There's a lot of different tools there that are really useful.
And maybe just to jump in while some questions are being formulated. We didn't cover today agents, for instance, but agents are increasingly available even in a corporate setting, corporate environment. So agents are super helpful when you have a very well-defined task that you want to execute or something that might be recurring. For instance, if you need a horizon scanning to see what's happening in the pharma sector in Indonesia, well, you may not want to go to the length of regulatory tracking and subscribing to some paid service, but you want to understand the top line events from the past week or the past 48 hours. So AI agents are really good at that sort of task to say, well, check those, turn that into a newsletter, send it to me at 8 a.m. every morning, or anything that's along the line of information gathering or executing on these kind of recurring tasks. So again, that's an interesting area. Copilot has certain capabilities. And another area could be the communication angle of creating visuals, creating visual assets or other assets, be that an internal briefing, be that a policy document or a public report. There are certain best practices and tips and tricks on how to do it. If the instruction is generic, the output will likely be generic. If the instruction is more nuanced, the output will be significantly better. So you can copy style. You can say, well, use the New Yorker cartoon style and generate an illustration for this particular piece. Then it's going to be far better than saying, well, generate an illustration for this piece. So there are, again, somewhat nuances, but still helpful. So here's another question that came in. Looking ahead 2 or 3 years, which parts of public affairs or policy work in the pharma sector you think will change the most because of AI? Well, I think the research bit for sure, when it comes to policy research, trend research, gathering information, understanding what happened in a certain field from a regulatory policy or media perspective, all of that will be fully automated. And the systems need to be, of course, reliable, that they don't hallucinate. but that level of work, which typically have been done by juniors or interns, will probably be fully automated. Also, I think that the quality of the work can significantly improve because AI can have those additional layers of thinking, stress testing, applying Harvard best practices, using McKinsey frameworks, or how would a McKinsey consultant challenge this particular report. Those sort of things can really increase the quality of the output in not just in the pharma sector, but basically in any business sector at large. Jacques, anything else?
No, I think that's a really good answer. I think the most time-consuming and data-heavy tasks will be taken care of by AI, and I think, as you said, I think the quality of the work will increase, and I think people will focus on making better strategic decisions and avoid spending too much time doing all this more basic work of finding information, analyzing it. I think that can also be just automated these days. So with that, we're really happy to continue this conversation. We're really happy to see many people joining us today. If you're still interested in learning more, feel free to go on the website or reach out on LinkedIn. And we do have 2 more sessions this week. So if you know anyone, or if you're also interested in knowing more in terms of using AI for international organizations or trade associations, then we're happy to see you later this week as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Those of you who might watch the recording later on, you're welcome to reach out. So thanks very much. To be continued.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.